which actually follows the story of Alzheimer's disease through a family from North Dakota, the DeMoe family. And with me tonight are Robin and Jessica on the far end McIntyre, who are members of this family. Their mother, Laurie, her maiden name was DeMoe, and they and the rest of their family have been the reason why I did this book. I'd like you to keep in mind as we speak tonight two things about this book. If you haven't read it, it's a scary story. I'm not going to lie to you. There's really nothing about Alzheimer's that's not scary. But it's also, I think, a hopeful story, and my hope is that it will inspire you in your own lives and that you'll learn a little bit about this disease that affects so many of us. Before I get started, I'd kind of like to know something, just by a show of hands. How many people in this room have been impacted by Alzheimer's in some way? Okay, yeah. Well, that actually reflects a little bit about what we know. Over 5 million people in the United States today have Alzheimer's, and it's actually our country's 6th leading cause of death, which is not something that too many people know. Yeah. Worldwide, there are between 24 and 36 million people we think who have it. And I say we think because only 1 in 4 people who have Alzheimer's disease is actually diagnosed. It looks like a lot of other diseases. The symptoms are the same as many other things, but Alzheimer's is typically the most common cause of dementia. So this is a topic that matters to a lot of people, and what's strange is that we still don't really know, the average person, very much about Alzheimer's, which is one of the reasons why I wrote a book. And the other reason why is because I met this family in 2009. These are the DeMoes, and if I can get the pointer to work, this is Laurie, who is their mom. We have a few more slides of Laurie here. And that's Robin up on the top right, and Robin and Jessica on the top left with their younger sister, Chelsea. I met these people in April 2009. The University of Pittsburgh assigned me to write an article about them for a newsletter, and at the time, I really didn't know very much about Alzheimer's. I knew that President Reagan had it. I knew that Rita Hayworth had it. I thought it was a disease that mainly affected older people, and my perception of it was that it was a rather gentle disease and that you kind of faded away and forgot things. So at that first meeting, I spent about 2 hours in a hotel room in downtown Pittsburgh and talked to several members of the family. And when I walked out, they had completely changed my life. And whether you know them or not, they're changing yours too. What this family has is very different than what we think of as Alzheimer's disease. They have a mutation. It's a genetic mutation that occurs in fewer than 1% of all people who have Alzheimer's. And if you have that mutation, 100% you're getting Alzheimer's. So this isn't the same thing as having Alzheimer's run in your family. You can be diagnosed with this before you're even born. And your symptoms start showing up in your 40s, and by the time you're in your 50s, you're gone. And what's possibly the most devastating part of this disease to me as a parent is you have a 50% chance of passing this along to your children. So these 6 siblings learned this information in 2004, and they were working, paying off mortgages, raising their children, all the things that we kind of take for granted. And then basically a bomb went off in their family tree, and sibling after sibling after sibling learned that they were positive for this mutation. And in fact, of these 6 siblings, the only one that didn't have it is Carla. So what do you do when you get news like this? You have about 10 years left before you can't remember anything. And this is a disease that has no known cure and no known survivors in its history. Well, in their case, they did something that I thought was remarkable. They made a collective decision as a family that they were going to fight back. They had no idea how they were going to do that. They had no idea who was going to help them. But they decided collectively, we're not going to take it. We're going to do something about it. Let me take a step back from that for a moment and ask for another show of hands. How many people in this room are concerned that they may one day get Alzheimer's? Okay. Once again, you're in good company, because Alzheimer's is the second most feared malady in the United States. It's only behind cancer. As you can see, those numbers are actually rising between 2006 and 2010.
I can't hear her.
And there are very good reasons for that. Of the top 10 causes of death in the United States, Alzheimer's disease is the only one that has no cure. It doesn't even have a treatment that's going to slow it down. And it kills more people than breast and prostate cancer combined. We've known about it for more than 100 years, and it's probably been around for thousands of years, so there are very good reasons to be afraid. But there's also a valid reason for hope, and that brings me to this family. As I mentioned earlier, Jessica and Robin's mother, Laurie, was one of the siblings who unfortunately inherited this mutation. And at the time we learned this, Jessica and Robin were just starting their lives as young adults. Their younger sister, Chelsea, was still in high school. And as part of their decision to fight the disease, the DeMoes became connected with the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at the University of Pittsburgh. One by one, each of them, and eventually their cousins, their children, the entire extended family, began coming to Pitt each year to serve as research subjects in a study that hopes to lead to a viable drug treatment, which will address the underlying biology of the disease. It's not going to just alleviate symptoms. It will actually change the disease. So, what exactly is Alzheimer's disease? Here's the basics of what we know so far. People who have Alzheimer's disease have two abnormal proteins growing in their brain. Those are amyloid and tau. Amyloid's a protein that naturally occurs in the body, but if you have Alzheimer's disease, it forms plaques between your brain cells and keeps them from talking to each other. Tau is also a normal protein, but when you have Alzheimer's disease, it twists up inside your brain cells, which causes them to die. So your brain cells die. And those remnants of the dead cells are called tangles. Plaques and tangles are considered to be the signature of Alzheimer's disease. That's what they look like. That's an illustration. You can see the tangles are a little hard to see on this illustration, but that's inside the neuron, and the plaques block the signals between the neurons. For close to 100 years, the only way that we could see those plaques and tangles and definitively say that somebody has Alzheimer's disease was by looking at slides of their brain after an autopsy. As you can imagine, that's actually not very helpful in trying to find a treatment for a disease because you're not figuring out how it actually occurs. You just know what happened after the fact. That's where Pittsburgh comes in. In 2002, these two doctors, who are Bill Plunk, he's the guy seated at the computer here, and Chet Mathis, standing behind him, invented a chemical called Pittsburgh Compound B. That is what's called a radiotracer. You inject it into somebody's arm, and it travels up into your brain, and it lights up. These red plaques here are amyloid in a brain with Alzheimer's, and this is a normal brain. Why is that important? Well, this is our first opportunity to see Alzheimer's in a living brain. Obviously, it's valuable to see how the disease is unfolding in real time because then you can target the biology. And since the DeMoe family knows which family members, based on their genetic testing, will get Alzheimer's, doctors can look at their brains with Pittsburgh compound B and see what's occurring there and what symptoms are associated with which stages of biology in their brain. And recently, science has also developed a way to look at tau proteins. That's a more recent technology. So this helps them better target the treatments that will hopefully stop the disease. When we think of early stage Alzheimer's, you guys have probably heard the phrase early stage Alzheimer's. Somebody starts to become a little bit forgetful. That's actually, that's a misleading name. That's actually mid-stage Alzheimer's. Amyloid is growing in your brain probably 20 years before that, and you look completely normal and have no idea it's happening. So if you were able to see that on a brain scan, it's extremely valuable. Because as with most diseases, scientists now believe that early intervention is the key for Alzheimer's. To draw an analogy that might be more familiar to you, if you catch cancer in its earliest stages, chemotherapy is more likely to be successful than if you wait until it's already spread through other parts of the body. Same thing is believed to be true of Alzheimer's disease, and that's true of a lot of complex diseases. So a few years ago, the Pitt research with the Dementia family was merged with a larger network of people who have the same genetic syndrome, and while they're rare, they're extremely valuable for research. They're now part of what's called the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Study, or DIAN, that's its nickname. It's based at Washington University in St. Louis, but they have trial sites all over the world, including Pitt, which is actually why Robin and Jessica are here this week. That's what they'll be doing in Pittsburgh with the rest of their week. Previously, some of the drugs that were being used, that are currently being used in this trial, were used in people that already had symptoms, and they didn't work. Probably because they were given too late, or at least that's what scientists think. So if they give them to somebody before they have symptoms, they may stop you from ever getting Alzheimer's. The only way to really test that out is to have people that you know are going to get Alzheimer's but don't have it yet. So, they're the key. Possibly also there'll be a drug developed in the near future to treat the tau proteins, which means the ultimate solution for Alzheimer's would be some kind of combination therapy. And that's what we use in a lot of other complex diseases like HIV/AIDS or cancer. It's a complex disease, probably will require multiple treatments to actually solve it. But it's through the dedication of this family that we are approaching the answers to some of these questions, and the people are actually what were to me the most meaningful part of writing this book. Jessica and Robin's mom, Laurie, here in the blue shirt, she was actually one of the most courageous people I've ever known. This is hard to get through with you guys sitting here. When I first met her in 2009, Laurie, you wouldn't actually probably have realized, unless you were looking for it, that Laurie had Alzheimer's disease. She was still working, I believe. This is when she was living in Idaho. She was reading. She's very funny, very witty. She's a very independent person, very capable person. And watching her go through what happened with this disease was, as I said, life-changing for me. I was with her during one of those grueling weeks of testing, and these guys can speak to it firsthand, but that testing is brutal. It's not a vacation, and it was hard for her to be here. And I asked her how she wanted to be remembered, because that's what I was there to do, to kind of explain to people who didn't have a chance to meet her who she was. And she said she wanted to be remembered as two things: happy and a good mother. Laurie knew when she did these trials that they weren't going to help her. She wasn't actually eligible for the drug trials. They were just looking at the biology of her brain. And one of the things that people don't really understand about Alzheimer's patients is that when they travel, they get very disoriented when they get back home. So actually, every time she came to Pittsburgh, she was shortening the amount of time she had left with her family. But she did it because she wanted to do something to save them, and she wanted to do something to save us in this room. To me, that's the ultimate courage. She died in February 2016. Her daughters were with her when that happened. Her contribution, the contribution of her brother Brian here, who passed away in 2010, the contributions of her brother Dean here in the white, and her brother Jamie here on the left, who are still working and they are participating in the drug trials, those, I believe, are the key to what's going to lead us out of this Alzheimer's riddle. And with that, I would like to turn this over to Robin and Jessica to speak a little bit firsthand about what it's like to be part of a family on the front lines like that.
Thank you. It really is a great honor to be here and to have an opportunity to share our story. What does facing Alzheimer's look like to me? What does facing Alzheimer's look like to a sister? What does facing Alzheimer's look like as a neighbor, as a friend, maybe even a parent? There are so many questions and unknown things when you're facing this disease that it can get a little overwhelming in those thoughts of what to do next and where are we going with this. Luckily, we had amazing role models as a mother and then our uncles who have really just led the way for us to be successful in fighting this disease. I am here for my annual checkup at the University of Pittsburgh, where I spend the next 3 days going through a series of very grueling tests, as Niki mentioned. Everything from MRIs to brain scans, lumbar puncture, cognitive testing, neuropsychological exams, physical exams, over a period of a 3-day time. And while we're always thankful to be here and everyone up there has become like family, it's a very emotionally draining process. However, it gives our family so much hope. Being involved in the research allows me to feel like I am continuing on my mother's legacy. Her participating in the research in the end of her life was about the single most important thing she could do. She spent her last visit here in Pittsburgh participating in research the same year that we admitted her into a care facility. She was that driven to find a cure for my generation and all the other millions of people in our country and the world that need there to be a cure for this disease. I've recently just decided to be public with my own genetic status as part of the research that we're involved in. You are able to find out your genetic status, and as you heard Niki say, since my mom had the gene mutation, I now have a 50-50 chance of inheriting the same genetic mutation that would cause me to go through the same disease processes as my mom. And unfortunately, in 2012, I did receive the bad news that I had inherited the same genetic mutation, meaning my chances of getting early onset Alzheimer's are 100%. Being at the age of 34, this means I could have possibly already lived more of my life than I have left, which is very frightening. My mother passed away at 56, started changing when she was in her mid-40s. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I'm not really sure, my mom and her siblings didn't have the opportunity to find that information out before they began their families and doing all of the things people normally do through their mid-30s and 40s. So it has changed a lot of things in my life, no doubt. I've decided not to have children because I've dedicated my body and life basically to research. However, that's a choice I gladly make. I can feel and understand all of the hope and power that my mom received through being in the research. And I'm very glad that I can stand here and tell people how important it is for the research and all of the awareness with the disease, and how important it is to have a big support group of not only your sisters and your friends, but also your neighbors and everyone else in your community. And I want Jessica to come up and be able to tell you a little bit about that role.
Going after these two is kind of brutal.
I think it's on, just hold it close.
Okay. Thanks for having us, Pittsburgh. We love it here. We've been coming to Pittsburgh for, I don't know, 10? We're going on 10 years, 10 years now. We love it here. We're always, it's like a second home for a very, very odd reason. I did get my genetic results about 10, 11 years ago in 2006, and I was one of the first of my generation to find out that I did not carry the genetic mutation to cause Alzheimer's, as my mother had, which was, yeah, thank you. It was a really great day, and I was young. I was just like a wee little baby. I was only 26 at that time, and really didn't quite have my path figured out, and found out my mom's that she tested positive for the gene, and I immediately changed my life, just changed my career mostly, and got myself on a little bit of a different path to becoming what I now will, hopefully be my legacy, as becoming a caregiver. I was not able to be a very hands-on caregiver with my mother, and I feel like we all have different roles. Robin definitely took that role on more as she moved from Denver to Wyoming to take care of her before we went into a home. Caregiving is a very, very, very important role, and I don't know if there's anybody here. I would imagine there's at least a few. That's probably harder than dealing with the disease yourself. So if there are any caregivers out there, I do want you to know that you are not alone, and that there is help for you. And one of those, since this is kind of a majorly public problem, and there's probably a lot of you in this room, I would highly recommend you using the resources at your library as well as your local Alzheimer's association. That has been extremely, extremely important to our family, and we are very big advocates for the Alzheimer's Association. Anything that you need or want, as well as, thank goodness, we had somebody that finally addressed the issue and wrote a book about Alzheimer's. I totally lost my whole train of thought, which is fine. I do have to make one call out, because it's my first opportunity to do this ever in public, and my family just wants to thank Niki from the bottom of our hearts for writing this book, because just appreciate you. Thank you. We are going to have question and answers, and I'm gladly cutting mine a little bit short because I know that there's going to be a lot of questions, which we're going to be happy to answer, / just discussions, or we can hear your stories. If you have anything else to ask, then just please do that at the end. Thank you.
Sorry, harder for me to use the handheld mic because I'm operating the clicker. So, what's next for Alzheimer's disease? In 2012, the U.S. Health and Human Services Department released the National Plan to address Alzheimer's disease, and the goal was prevent or effectively treat Alzheimer's by 2025. That's 8 years from now. That was a moonshot, guys. The doctors that are doing this heard that and said, what? It was kind of like the demos. They said, we don't know how we're going to get there, and we don't know who's going to help us, but I guess we have to, because our government's telling us we do. Well, why did they do that? It's not out of the goodness of their hearts. It's not because Alzheimer's is a difficult thing to watch. It is an economic necessity, and I'm going to show you why. Age is the biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease for all of us. Not people with genetic mutations, everybody on planet Earth. After you turn 65, your risk doubles every 5 years. After 85, your risk is nearly 50%. The first baby boomer turned 65 on New Year's Day, 2011. 10,000 more people turn 65 every day. They call it the silver tsunami. Without prevention, by 2050, 13.8 million Americans 65 and up are going to have Alzheimer's disease. Well, what are we doing about it? These guys, they're fighting. We all need to be doing more. To give you some perspective of where Alzheimer's fits in general science funding, in 2015, the US government spent $5.4 billion on cancer research, $1.2 billion on heart disease, $3 billion on HIV and AIDS, and that's money well spent because death rates are falling in all of those diseases. Now, what are they doing with Alzheimer's? In 2015, they spent $566 million. That's 10% as much as cancer, 47% as much as heart disease, 19% as much as HIV and AIDS, and guess what? The death rates and costs are climbing. The costs are astronomical. It's the most expensive disease in the United States. The direct costs in 2016, $236 billion. That's more than heart disease, it's more than cancer, and it's definitely more than HIV. We're the ones paying for it. Medicare and Medicaid spent about $160 billion fee on Alzheimer's care in 2016. That's 1 in every 5 Medicare dollars. By 2050, it's going to be 1 in 3. We do not have a choice. Economically, we must find a way to delay or prevent this disease, or economically, we're done. And the thing about Alzheimer's is this: it doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what your income is. It doesn't care what your politics are, what your religion is, what your nationality is. It doesn't care. It's going to impact everybody in this room, whether you get it, or a family member gets it, or you're paying for those people. That's what has to happen. I leave you with those thoughts because what these people are doing is leading to research that's going to move the needle on Alzheimer's disease. I absolutely believe that. The funding needs to be there. We need to have more researchers doing this work, and we need to come together as a country, I think, to lead the way so that this disease is finally out of our collective human family tree. And with that, we would like to take your questions and answers.
I have been in research studies at McKinsey. Is there a possibility of getting research?
The question is there an opportunity to get into Alzheimer's research at the University of Pittsburgh? And I believe that the answer to that is yes. The Alzheimer's Association has a program called Trial Match, and you can go onto their website and enter your information, and they will try and match you to a study in which your characteristics fit. Then I also believe that the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center is constantly having different studies and enrolling different types of people, so you might also want to check locally there. But Trial Match through the Alzheimer's Association can really probably link you to a broader spectrum.
Are they doing other research around the world, different countries, and are they coordinating the research? You know?
Yes, they are, and that's one of the things that I address in my book. So because the people that are in this category are so rare, there are a few other studies. There's one notably, I don't know if any of you saw, there was a 60-minute segment that reran on Oscar night, and those folks are in my book as well. I interviewed those doctors. So there's a pocket of people in Colombia who have the same mutation that the Mo family has. And the doctors who are doing that research are coordinating their results with the doctors that are doing this research, as well as doctors who are researching people in the general population who have what we call sporadic Alzheimer's, to see how all of those diseases resemble each other and how the drug trials in the early onset patients might impact later onset patients. Sir in the green?
Which of the currently used Alzheimer's medications seems to have or might have the best preventive effect?
Do you mean if you have Alzheimer's disease and your doctor prescribes something for you? You mean the experimental ones?
Are these experimental drugs or are they current drugs that are being used?
These are experimental drugs.
Thank you.
The current drugs don't actually do anything to prevent Alzheimer's disease. They, for some people, will alleviate symptoms and others not. Temporarily.
Yes, I'd like to know, how does one go about getting tested, having their children tested for the inherited gene of Alzheimer's?
Well, I can't.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll elaborate. If you think that what you have is what these guys have, as I said at the beginning, this is different from Alzheimer's running in your family. You may have several relatives that have Alzheimer's. It doesn't mean you have what these guys have. In fact, you probably don't. So, you can contact a research center such as the University of Pittsburgh and request genetic testing, but you have to be part of the study to have that happen. And most people won't qualify for that. There is a very good reason, by the way, you bring up an excellent point. Why can't all of us just go get tested for Alzheimer's disease? Because there isn't a treatment for it. So doctors do not want to give you that information without having something that you can do about it.
Are you saying then what this family has is different than just a general Alzheimer's disease?
Yes, it's the same disease, but how they get it is unique, or almost unique. Less than 1% of people who have Alzheimer's disease have what these guys have, which is a flaw in their DNA that causes Alzheimer's disease.
Would you say Alzheimer's is inherited, even though it's a different than what they have?
The best answer to that, I think, is comparing it to something like cancer. We know that there are many causes of cancer. You can get a genetic predisposition for cancer. There are environmental causes for cancer. It's the same with Alzheimer's disease, we think.
Thank you.
Sure. Ma'am in the back?
I have a couple questions. Thanks for being here. And is it Jessica? She doesn't have the disease. So this may sound silly. Can she pass it on, even though she doesn't have the gene? Can you pass on that DNA?
That is a really good question, and the best answer is no. Since I do not have the genetic component, I cannot pass it on to future children if I do have them.
But they still could have,
Oh, yeah.
and they still
Any
could have it in
other-
another form.
Any other form. I could still get any other form of dementia, Alzheimer's. I just could, I just know that I am not going to get the genetic form. Yeah, that's a good question. That one's asked a lot.
Okay, and the second one is, ask for the drug.
Aricept?
Aricept, thank you. Like, is that something you're saying isn't really working? Is it masking it?
I'm going to choose my words carefully to take a minute. Aricept doesn't take Alzheimer's disease away.
Correct.
Okay, it doesn't remove anything. It sort of mutes the symptoms for some people temporarily.
Slow it down?
No, it doesn't slow it down. It's still progressing at the same rate. Okay? It may make you seem better, but you're not getting better. And it's not slowing it down.
So what's it doing? Why take it?
It makes you feel a little bit better temporarily.
Make you act a little bit more normal.
For some people. For some it doesn't.
Whatever.
Interestingly, so their uncles who are on one of the earlier photos that I showed, the one that passed away in 2010, he took Aricept and it did basically nothing for him except give him a really bad digestion problem, tore up his stomach. So one of his younger brothers, Dean, who is still working, he's the guy in the white shirt, he won't take anything. He jokes that he takes Mountain Dew. But Dean is now 56, 54. Dean is about the age where his brother was in a nursing home and he's still working.
But he has
But he has the gene. He's getting the, yeah.
my mom is 96. Basically got it, like you may have said 20 years earlier, but we noticed it maybe when she was 90. So in our eyes, in our family, chances are we're not going to get it till 90 or so. No?
It could be or it might not be. It's really not that simple. Each case is very different. Actually, okay. Each case is different because there are many causes of Alzheimer's disease. Sir?
In this particular instance, in this day and age, why not approach it genetically? Why not alter the gene like we do with so many other diseases?
That's an excellent question. It actually is one line of research.
So it is going on.
That is going on, yes. This is by far not the only Alzheimer's research that's happening. This happens to be the one that is a drug trial that's in human trials. So that's...
The second question, what kills the person?
That's a great question. It's a great question. What kills, the question was, what kills the person when you have Alzheimer's disease? I'm going to take a stab at it, but your experience with your mom might also be, I think, instructive here. When you have Alzheimer's disease, basically your brain forgets how to work. It reverses, okay? So you start getting back to the point where you can no longer walk because your brain forgets how to make the rest of your body walk. You can no longer swallow because your brain forgets how to swallow. So you can essentially starve to death, but then also, because you're bedridden, you may have some diseases that are associated with that, such as pneumonia. There are secondary reasons why people die from Alzheimer's, but if you take all of those away, they're still going to die from Alzheimer's. Maybe you guys can speak about your mom's experience.
Yeah, our mom was walking, talking, dancing, singing, feeding herself, all of these things, 3 weeks before she passed away. We somewhat believe that she may have been pushed over the edge through medications that were being given to her to keep her calm. She had kind of gotten to a combative, aggressive, very irritated state, and the medications they were giving her weren't helping, and it finally just got to a point where the facility she was in felt like they couldn't properly care for her anymore. She went into sort of a manic phase where she was just babbling a lot, acted like she was in a lot of pain. And this went on for about 2 weeks. They tried to keep her as comfortable as she could. But then she quit eating. And then I think her heart got weak and fluid started building in her extremities. And then finally she aspirated. But we also believe that, and this is kind of a reach, I guess you'll believe whatever you want to when you're trying to deal through grief and loss, but we also kind of feel like she chose that it had gotten to a point that she didn't want to be there anymore and sort of checked out and was able to escape a lot of the end phases of the disease, which for many people leaves them bedridden and unable to speak, which is how our grandfather passed away. However, he was in that state for years and years.
Man in front, you've been waiting a long time.
Once someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, that they definitely know, they did brain scans and they know, do they do genetic testing on the men?
Typically not, unless you were part of research. And they typically don't do brain scans, by the way, to diagnose you still. That's something that's still only available in a research setting because it's expensive and because there's nothing they can do for you. So you and I can't really go and get a brain scan and see if amyloid's growing in our brains. And I don't want you to go to your family doctor thinking that.
I guess just because it keeps coming up a little bit, our family started putting together, which is in the book, a lot of family history to get to the point we are now. So it was years of our mom and her siblings thinking that what they had gone through with their father was over. They didn't think it was going to affect them. Now all of a sudden, some of the siblings are showing similar symptoms to our grandfather and his mother, and we started putting the pieces together and talking to a lot of people, and so really it was having a really long family history that's kind of also gotten us to this point.
Go ahead.
I was just curious, you say it's been around for at least 100 years. How come I feel that it's just a current disease? Why did people die of this 70 years ago and we thought they were dementia?
Yes, that's exactly so. Actually, it's a wonderful question, and I do address this in the book. It was first identified in 1906. It was thought to be a very rare disease. We thought it was separate from what we call a number of things: old age senility, hardening of the arteries. Some of you have probably heard these terms. It was Alzheimer's disease. So that was actually realized to be the same disease in 1968. And still we didn't care that much about it, to be honest with you, because we thought it was only something that affected older people, and people were not living as long then. And it wasn't until the mid-70s, when the Alzheimer's Association was formed, that it started to be thought of as a public health problem. And it wasn't really until even later than that that we realized what a large health problem it was. Okay. I'm sorry, we should probably take some folks from this side, maybe in the back.
Yes, I was wondering how important, and if your mother had advanced directives or living wills.
The question is, how important were advanced directives and living wills?
Honestly, one of the most important things ever. Our father got a lot of things in place for our mom as far as long-term health care and living wills and all of those documents. He had most of those things put together before she even found out her genetic status, simply because it was already happening in a lot of the other siblings. And it is one of the best things you can do, not only for yourself, but for your family members. When we were going through the end phases of life with our mother, there were absolutely zero questions about what we were to do, which led to no room for argument or just not knowing what we needed to do, because she had laid it all out and we were just simply able to follow her wishes. So those things are extremely, extremely important.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. With the diagnosis Alzheimer dementia, what does that actually mean? And also, is a PCP capable of treating this, or should we be looking for another specialist?
So the question was, what's
Alzheimer.
the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
Well, that's a diagnosis, Alzheimer dementia.
Okay. Actually, dementia is a separate catch-all phrase that includes many different things that affect your brain. Okay, you can have dementia from having a stroke. You can have dementia actually from a urinary tract infection, believe it or not, even though it's temporary. But Alzheimer's is the most common by a long shot form of dementia. Your second question was about PCPs?
Yeah, what is a primary care physician, is he capable of treating somebody with this diagnosis? Or should we be looking for an internal medicine, or?
Well, I think, I'm speaking off the cuff here, I think PCPs are increasingly very aware of this problem, especially if they work with a lot of older people. They're trained to look for it. But in terms of a specialist, if you're older, there isn't a treatment for it. So there isn't somebody who specializes in a treatment for it.
Well, what I'm concerned about is medication, of adding a lot of medication to pre-existing medication, like for diabetes, heart disease, those type of medications. By adding like Aricept and adding some antidepressants, is the PCP capable of not throwing them all together and making things worse in the memory loss?
My most honest answer is it probably depends on the PCP. Because in the case of Robin and Jessica's mother, a lot of medications were implicated at the end of her life that might have been different with a different doctor, may have been better for her with a different doctor, we'll never know.
Are you involved with the A4 study at Pitt?
I'm not involved with the A4 study, but I'm aware of it.
Is it anything at all like what these ladies and their families have?
It is in the sense that they are comparing the two diseases. They're not two diseases, it's the same disease, but they're comparing the two different streams of the disease. So A4 is what we call, I'm trying to be careful not to mislead you. You can have a genetic predilection for Alzheimer's the way you have a genetic predilection for breast cancer, for example. Doesn't mean you have what's in this family, okay? But there is a genetic component of it. That's what the A4 study is that she's referencing. That's being studied to determine whether people who have that sort of genetic predilection in the general population, all of us, how the disease develops in those folks, and how actually these same drugs affect people before they're symptomatic if they have that genetic makeup. How that drug impacts somebody's cognitive abilities. So it's a long-range study because it's going to take many years to figure out if your cognition stays the same or gets worse. So yes, they are comparing results. Joanne.
to say, I saw the special on Dementia, and I'm so impressed. It's so heart-wrenching, you know, it's wonderful, and the book Niki is written, you just bring everything to life. My mother had early onset. We were under the impression the aerosol was healthy. Unfortunately, she died in a car accident, and we never really knew how far it was going to go. But she was on the same, and there were things I now know from reading the book of things that were going on maybe in her 50s that were showing us things. We were just so happy she knew us. But I want to thank your family and Niki from the bottom of my heart. It's so wonderful.
Thank you very much, and my condolences. Your mom was a lovely person. I was fortunate enough to know her.
You mentioned your mom had irritability, at least in the later stages. It seems that that's a common, not universal, but a common thing that goes on in Alzheimer's. And then the people I've known who have it, sometimes the flip side of being very joyful, like more than the average person joyful. I don't know if you're supposed to suggest
I can think of a few family members on both sides of that. Yeah. Her mom got nasty. As did one of her uncles. We actually had probably a lot more of that. So the flip side, which you all know, is the very, very combative, very irritable. You just never know what's going to set them off. I don't really want to go into too many details about that. But on the flip side, we do have a couple of family members in there. My mom's same generation, but cousins of hers who are kind of the opposite spectrum, where they both are real giggly to this craziest degree that you could ever imagine. So yeah, we get, our family definitely has both, and I feel like there's not really ever been a middle ground. It's been real bad to these few gals in Wisconsin that just have this very fascinating, over the top, cackly giggles about pretty much everything. Very interesting, yeah. I want to get that gal in the red hat because I've watched her hand go up all night.
Hi, I'm 44, and I finally got my doctors to get me some cognitive testing, and I've already been diagnosed with my own cognitive impairment. My mom, what age were you diagnosed with Alzheimer's? Youngish side. So I'm very interested in getting the genetic testing done. And I guess my question is to you, knowing that you have that gene, what decisions have you made as far as how you want to live your life, and has your outlook on things been affected?
That's a great question, and thank you for also sharing your situation. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, honestly, I changed everything in my life, just to be completely honest. I changed careers. I ended a 5-year relationship. I moved home to help take care of my mom, started a new relationship, and started a new job. And then I also started the drug trial. So I guess initially, for several years, I really did struggle, probably for the first 2 years, with knowing that I had the genetic mutation. In just I was just really emotional and really sensitive to things. Since then, I feel like the knowledge has given me a ton of power, and in a couple of ways. One, I've made a commitment to myself not to get the disease. I'm trying to, well, maybe play devil's advocate, but in a different kind of way. But trying the power of mind over body. And I started seeing a life coach to try and get my life back on track, because after I found out my genetic status, things did get a little bit weird. But during that, made the commitment to myself not to get the disease, so I'm going to see how that plays a part in it. But I've decided also then not to have children, But the most powerful part, I think, has been being able to use my voice to help educate other people, let people know that they're not alone, try and make Alzheimer's not be a secret or taboo topic as it is in many families, because a lot of people truly believe since there's nothing you can do about it, why even talk about it? Which is heartbreaking, because we need more people on the front lines doing the dirty work, being the lab rats and going through, you know, the gamut of tests that you do. I certainly do not regret my decision to find out. I currently am the strongest and most powerful I've ever been in my life.
Well, I'm already reading the book on my Kindle, but I bought a copy of the book. And can you talk more about the chromosome 13, number 13, which is the true genetic marker for early onset of Alzheimer's?
Actually, okay, interesting question. There are 3 known genetic mutations that cause Alzheimer's disease. What these guys have is called PS1, which is the most common one. There's PS2, which is less common, and there's one called APP, which I think is the one that you're thinking of. It was the first one that was identified, but it's actually not very common. It's the same disease, it just occurs, the flaw occurs on a different chromosome. One thing that is a little bit interesting about that is, and this is actually a current thread of research at Pitt, people who have Down syndrome, if they live long enough, more likely than not develop Alzheimer's disease. That is because the chromosome that's tripled, and most of you may know that Down syndrome is caused by one chromosome in tripling up. That's the one that makes amyloid protein that we discussed earlier. So they're getting extra doses of amyloid. It's one of the ways that we came to understand that amyloid is a cause, not the only cause, but a cause of Alzheimer's disease. So at Pitt, they're exploring Alzheimer's, and fortunately, more people with Down syndrome, just like more people in general, are living longer. So it used to be that people would die before they developed the disease, but now that they're living longer, we're able to study it through brain scans and so forth. But the chromosome isn't as important as the mutation causes the disease pretty much the same way. I'm sorry, there is a lady in the back who's been waiting quite a while with your...
Are there any other reasons or causes of Alzheimer's other than genetics? I mean, such as head trauma? I mean, like cancer is a two-way street, or diabetes is two-way, it can be inherited or self-inflicted.
There are many, many causes of Alzheimer's, we believe. Again, this is an area of research that's still fairly new. Funding is what drives what we know about any disease. So you've seen what the funding picture looks like. It's interesting that you bring up head trauma. So head trauma, you know, we've suddenly started hearing a lot about concussions, what causes athletes, for example, to develop dementia. I said earlier, dementia is kind of a catch-all phrase, but it looks like Alzheimer's, right? People become aggressive and forgetful. What's happening in their brains is tau protein, that other protein that happens inside your brain cells in Alzheimer's. So there is definitely something going on that's related. The same is true of Parkinson's disease and other brain diseases. They all have some familial relationship to each other. We don't know exactly what they all are. But to answer your original question, are there other causes, environmental causes? Yeah, probably. We don't understand them all that well yet. One of the doctors who works with the Colombian population that I mentioned earlier told me when I interviewed him, we know more about the outer reaches of space than we know about our own brains.
Thank you.
You know, with medical advancement and average life expectancy, doesn't it almost guarantee that there'll be exponential growth in Alzheimer's?
Yes, those numbers don't lie. Every day, 10,000 more people turn 65. Every 5 years after you turn 65, your risk is doubling. So yes, as we live longer, there are going to be more people developing Alzheimer's, and it is a very expensive disease. Sir in the yellow?
Before the Affordable Health Care Act, were you able to get insurance?
Well, I'll speak to what I know about this particular instance, which I think illustrates the answer to your question. The question was, before the Affordable Care Act, were you able to get insurance if you knew you had Alzheimer's? Answer is, it depends on your insurance carrier. Why is that important? Well, okay, so the DeMoe family knew in 2004 they had something going on in their family tree, and a geneticist told them, each one of you has a 50-50 chance of getting Alzheimer's. Jessica and Laurie's mom, or Jessica and Robin's mom, Laurie, delayed getting her diagnosis for 2 years after getting that news because her father had the foresight to get her long-term care insurance as just in case. Okay? That ended up saving him financially when it turned out that she did have the disease, but she had to wait for 2 years. Now, why is that important? Their dad just told me last week that that company no longer offers that option. It's costing them too much money. So, it was being offered, but had they known that she had Alzheimer's, she likely would not have been covered.
What about just regular insurance? Hospitalization?
It depends on your policy. If your policy covers what you're really looking at is, does it cover a facility that will take care of you when your family no longer can? There's not really, are you talking about the experimental drug?
No, long-term insurance is one thing, but just regular health insurance to go to the hospital when you got pneumonia. Were you able to get that?
I'm self-employed. I can't afford insurance.
I think he's saying before the Affordable Care Act, when you have been allowed to get regular insurance before.
Yeah, I haven't been diagnosed with anything, and actually, well, I mean, my genetic mutation isn't actually a part of my
genetic mutation isn't actually a part of my medical file. In the research, I'm only a number. I'm participant number 1041005. I don't have a name, and none of that is then linked to my medical record. So, not really, yeah, it doesn't really, I guess I don't know how to answer that question, but normally, yes, I think you would be able to because it's not part of that medical record.
In the very, very back.
When you talked before about the silence and the stigma surrounding Alzheimer's, his question points to an obvious reason why. People may not be able to get insurance, people may lose insurance, depending on the circumstances, or you could have a job, you could lose a job, you could be prevented from being hired for a job. So there are a lot of good reasons why.
There are a lot of people living in fear. Right. We were at a family conference specifically put together for the people of the dominantly inherited Alzheimer's network. It's their participants. And I would say 75% of the people there are living their day-to-day life in fear. They weren't even putting last names on name tags because people didn't want to be identified. People were sitting in special sections of the room just to make sure there was no chance they were going to be on camera. There was a young woman who had traveled across half of the country alone because her family doesn't believe there's anything they can do about it. This disease is God's will. There are people who are not having families because they're living in fear or afraid they're going to lose their job, afraid they're going to lose their friends. And I really, truly think that needs to stop. It's very sad.
I'd like to just piggyback on that for a minute. How many people in this room were around in the 1980s? Okay, the same thing was true with HIV and AIDS, wasn't it? Why did that change? It changed because of research, it changed because people made it change, they insisted, okay? If you are quiet, it will never change.
It's the same way about diabetes. You never said you have diabetes, because your kids would have it, so they would whisper that they have sugar.
And people whispered about sugar, and people whispered about cancer, the big C. HIV/AIDS I bring up because it's the most recent one, and because it had this salacious background, so people didn't want to admit to it. Okay? Alzheimer's disease, as you've seen, it affects us all. But we need to make the policy reflect that fact. There should not be anyone that's ever denied insurance or loses their job because of Alzheimer's disease. We'll all be unemployed if that's the case. Look at the numbers. It has to change, and we are the ones that have to insist that it changes. That's why, I will say this, I was at the same conference that Robin was. I had to agree not to talk to anybody, basically, except for this family, but I was there to kind of observe. People were asking them, because the book hadn't come out yet, this was last July. They said, they're going to actually use, she's going to use your real name. She's going to use your real name. And one of the things that I love about this family is I told them that when I reached out to them in 2012 and said, I want to write this book, but I'm going to use your real name. And if you don't want that, or you want to not tell me things, then okay, but we're not doing it. It has to be done this way for that reason. And they had the courage to do it. And I give them all the credit in the world. In the back of the hat.
Okay. So 2 questions about the family dynamics. One is, I come from a group of 3 sister siblings, and I noticed that the youngest sister isn't making the rounds with you. How old is she now?
She is 31, and the only reason she isn't doing that is because she is expecting a baby any day. And she was focusing on her career. She's an emergency room nurse.
Okay, and so then, all right, so that was one of the curiosities, but I want to go back to your comment about, it's Jessica, right? About becoming a caregiver, because I think that caregivers are the most undervalued human beings walking the planet Earth.
Agreed.
And you made a conscious decision, and so it's sort of 2 parts. Are you a caregiver only to family members, or is that actually your vocation?
My career is a hairstylist, so
Okay.
I am a caregiver to many. Yeah, that part is crazy. In general, no, I was not born with the sweet little soul that my mom was, to just be born a caregiver. This is going to be a special circumstance for my sister and any of my other family members that need it. We've done trainings and all sorts of things over the years through the Alzheimer's Association. So, I mean, you know, personal experience is the best form of learning things, right? So, yeah, that's my role. That I will not be a caregiver for anybody other than my family, as I can think of right now, because it's just not in me. I only have it for my family.
Yeah. Well, it's big. It's big.
Man in the back.
Yeah, I've read that the current administration is reducing funding for the NIH. Am I correct on that? If I am correct, I think I've read that, heard that. Is that going to affect Alzheimer's research?
Of course. You are correct that you've read that. It hasn't happened yet. Yes, okay. The question is, the question was, will the current administration cut funding to the NIH? And the second part of the question was, will that impact the research? I'll answer the second part of the question first. Of course, if you cut funding to the NIH, which funds most research in the United States, yes, it will impact the progress. The first part of the question is a little more difficult to answer. Yes, that's something that you've probably heard, but I don't think we have any idea what's going to happen. I don't think that this is really a partisan issue. Actually, the president's father had Alzheimer's disease. probably most of Congress has a parent or somebody that had Alzheimer's disease, or maybe they have it, I don't know. No, I'm not saying that to be funny. You can have Alzheimer's disease and people don't know, okay? It affects us all, okay? But politicians are there to serve you. People must demand this funding. It makes absolute perfect sense financially to fund Alzheimer's disease. That's why I included the numbers in my slide, not to make you crazy on a Tuesday night looking at a whole bunch of numbers, but Alzheimer's disease gets peanuts compared to diseases that don't begin to touch its numbers in terms of who's affected, and it's only growing and getting worse. So, the answer to that is, you need to talk to your representatives. You must make your voice heard if this is something that's important to you, because I do believe that this is something that could, even if it's only on this one issue, the analogy I like to draw is, in this family is like any other family. They're not all lovey-dovey, hunky-dory, we love each other. They fight with each other. Read the book, you'll see. And they let me show that. Because it's important to show that people are human beings, they're not saints. We are all imperfect. We all have relatives we can't stand. But they came together because they realized they had to. I think that's a great microcosm of what I'd like to see happen in our country. Okay? We're really, it's not a secret, we're divided right now. But it doesn't really matter, does it? Because this disease is going to affect all of us. This is an issue we can get behind. That's just my thought.
Yeah.
Any difference in progression of early onset and not early onset Alzheimer's?
Early onset tends to be quicker. The disease looks pretty much the same, but the timeline is compressed. So, say you start showing symptoms, to use their mom as an example, I believe she started showing symptoms in her 40s. She passed away at 56. So it was about a 10-year time frame. Some people with later onset Alzheimer's do tend to live longer than that. And we don't know why. Interestingly, in their family, their uncle, Doug, who is the guy who's in a nursing home now and he can't move or speak, and his brother Dean, who's still working, they're 19 months apart in age. And they have the same mutation, but they're 10 or more years apart in symptoms, which is another example of how this family is a unique opportunity to see what were the factors in Dean's gene pool that delayed the disease for him. What were the environmental factors? What were things that you can do to exercise your brain to delay Alzheimer's every day? Alzheimer's Association, by the way, as Robin and Jessica both mentioned, have a lot of great resources about things you can do while we wait for prevention that can help you in terms of what diet you should pursue, what you should do mentally. There's a lot of thought, for example, that learning a language later in life as an adult is helpful, learning a new instrument. These are all, I won't say guesses, there's evidence for them. They're not guarantees. You're not going to stave off Alzheimer's by suddenly learning Chinese. But you'll get to learn Chinese and you may save your brain a little longer.
Thank you for those wise words. It's a great way to end the program this evening. Before we do applaud you one more time, I want to say that in the corner right there, we do have a lot of our library resources, a lot of them about caregiving, also about what you can do to prevent, as Niki just mentioned. So do take a look over there in that corner if you have time. Through that door, Jessica and Robin and Niki will be on the opposite side for book signing. Books will be for sale there. Also, if you were going to use a credit card, you could go to our front desk because we're selling books by credit card at the front desk. In the lobby, you'll find lots of refreshments too. So please join me in thanking them once again.